He told everyone he was going to die. 3 days later, 2,000 miles from home, he did. His name was Blair Adams. He was 31 years old. He lived in Surrey, British Columbia, a quiet working-class suburb east of Vancouver, where the mountains crowd the horizon on clear mornings and the pace of life is unhurried. People who knew him described the same person: reliable, cheerful, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He was good at his work. He was good with people. In the summer of 1996, something happened that changed all of that. He had been sober for 2 years. He attended meetings regularly and held his routine together with the careful discipline of someone who had worked hard to build stability. He was a foreman on a construction crew, the kind of job that rewards consistency, that depends on someone being present and reliable every morning. And then, quietly and without announcement, he stopped being that person. He stopped attending the meetings. He began leaving the worksite unlocked at the end of the day. Then he quit. He walked off the job one afternoon without collecting his final paycheck. For his co-workers, that was the detail that worried them most. A man who had been careful about money, who had spent 2 years rebuilding his life carefully, simply walking away from wages he had earned. They urged him to see a doctor. He told them quietly that he was not sure he could carry on there. Nobody understood what he meant by it. He did not explain. He began sleeping poorly. He stopped going back to his own apartment, staying instead at his mother's home, as though his own space had become unsafe, as though whatever he feared might be waiting there. He told friends, more than once and without dramatic emphasis, that someone was going to kill him. He did not elaborate. He did not name anyone. He stated it plainly, the way a person states something they have accepted as fact, and then he moved on with the conversation. He said it plainly, the way someone states a fact they have already accepted. Someone was going to kill him. His mother asked him many times what was wrong. She pressed gently, and then more directly, and each time he gave her a version of the same answer, that he thought he should not tell her, that it would be better if she did not know. She later said those words were somehow harder to absorb than silence would have been. They implied something specific, something he was protecting her from, a named thing rather than a nameless dread. On the 5th of July, 1996, Blair walked into his bank and withdrew nearly everything he had. He cleared his savings account. Then he went to the safe deposit box he maintained there and emptied that too, bundling together cash, gold coins, platinum coins, and jewellery. Items accumulated over years. The total was substantial. He put it all in a bag, walked out into the July sun, and did not look back. He was converting his stability into something portable, something he could carry. What had frightened Blair Adams badly enough to make him take everything he owned and leave? He was not politically connected. He was not a prominent figure. He was a construction foreman who had rebuilt a modest, careful life after some difficult years. Nothing in his background placed him in a world where the kind of threat he described would make obvious sense. And yet the fear was real enough to mobilise him, to make him act in ways that could not be undone. People who saw Blair in those final days before he left described a man who was present in a different way than before, slightly apart from everything around him, as though occupying a parallel frequency. He was not incoherent. He was not visibly distressed in a way that would alarm a stranger. He looked like someone who had received information that he was still working to integrate. On the 5th of July, he left his life behind. He did not know what was ahead. Where do you go when you believe someone intends to kill you? Blair's answer to that question would lead investigators across 2 countries and into one of the most persistently strange unsolved cases in the cold case records. His choices over those final days were not random. Each step had a logic, a direction. He was moving away from something, moving towards something. The tragedy is that neither the something behind him nor the something ahead of him has ever been identified. In those last days, Blair became something he had never been before, a man in flight. He had left his job, his apartment, and the life he had worked to rebuild. He had converted his savings into gold and cash he could carry on his body. He was moving. Whatever he feared it enough to abandon everything. And the question of what that thing was, the thing he was running from, has never been answered in 30 years of investigation. There is a particular quality to the fear he described that investigators have returned to many times. It was not general anxiety, it was not a vague sense of unease. It was specific enough that he withdrew a specific amount of money, tried to cross a specific border, and eventually ended up in a specific city in a specific state. Specific fears have specific sources, and that source has never been identified. He tried 3 times to cross into the United States. The 3rd time, he made it through. Blair's first attempt to leave Canada ended before it truly began. He drove to Victoria, British Columbia, and made his way to the ferry terminal that serves the crossing to Seattle. He was carrying thousands of dollars in cash, his gold coins, his jewellery, everything from the safety deposit box. Immigration officials at the terminal flagged him immediately. The amount of currency he was carrying triggered a standard screening. He did not give up. He tried again within days. The details of the second attempt are less precisely documented, but the outcome was the same. He turned back at the border once more. He spent those nights at his mother's home, still avoiding the apartment, still looking for a way through. He was not panicking. He was adapting, finding the next route, the next approach. On his 3rd attempt, Blair changed his approach entirely. He drove to the international airport in Vancouver and parked his own car in the long-term lot, where it would remain untouched for the duration of the investigation that followed his death. Then he walked into the terminal and rented a different vehicle, a clean car with no connection to his previous border attempts. He presented himself differently. This time, the border waved him through. He was in the United States. For the 3rd attempt, he changed his approach. He drove to the airport and switched vehicles. At the airport in Seattle, Blair purchased a ticket east. He paid in cash. The destination was Washington. DCA round-trip fare on the same route would have cost significantly less than a one-way. He bought one-way. That detail. One-way cash, more expensive, is one of the small facts that investigators would return to many times in the years that followed. It implies he did not expect to come back to Seattle. He boarded the flight and flew east across the continent. Below him, British Columbia gave way to the Rockies, and the Rockies gave way to the plains, and the plains gave way to the eastern seaboard. He was carrying everything he owned on his body. Cash, the gold, the jewellery. He had no checked luggage. He had no return ticket. He had no one waiting for him at the other end. He was simply moving. Away from something, towards something, eastward. There is something quietly extraordinary about this leg of the journey. Blair Adams had tried to cross an international border 3 times. He had withdrawn his entire savings. He had quit his job without collecting his wages. He had rented 2 cars, and now he was crossing the continent by air with no plan anyone could identify, heading for a city he had no documented connection to, carrying everything that mattered to him in a bag. Every step was deliberate. He flew east with everything he owned, heading toward a city where no one was waiting for him. He landed on the eastern seaboard in the early morning hours of July 10, 1996. He rented another car from an agency at the airport, paying cash again, and drove out of the city almost immediately. He had no known contacts in the capital. He made no calls, left no messages, met no one that investigators were ever able to trace. The city was simply where the plane landed. He drove south through the mid-Atlantic states and into the south. The drive from the capital to Knoxville, Tennessee takes roughly 7 hours under ordinary conditions. He made it in one continuous stretch, without stopping anywhere that left a record. No gas station transaction, no food purchase, no motel, just the road, southward through Virginia, into the mountains, into Tennessee. He arrived in Knoxville as the afternoon was giving way to evening. No one was waiting for him. He had never been there before. The question of why Knoxville is the question that has produced the most speculation and the fewest answers. Investigators found nothing. Not a phone record, not a letter, not a reported conversation, not a former connection of any kind, linking Blair Adams to that city or that state. The connection, if there was one, existed only inside his mind and was never communicated to anyone who survived to report it. He arrived in Knoxville as a stranger, and he died there as one. He pulled into the parking lot of a recently opened hotel along the interstate sometime around 7 in the evening. The hotel was new, one of those mid-range chain properties built along highway interchanges for travellers who need somewhere functional and unremarkable. He walked up to the front desk. He handed the clerk a $100 bill for the cost of a room. He did not wait for his change. The clerk called after him. He kept walking toward the elevator. He had travelled more than 2,000 miles. Whatever he was running from had moved faster. Over the next 40 minutes, something unusual happened at the hotel. Something the front desk clerk noticed and would describe in detail long afterward. Blair Adams came down from his room and entered the lobby. Then he exited, then he entered again, then exited again. He did this 5 times in 40 minutes. Each visit lasted only moments. He was not purchasing anything. He was not speaking to staff. He was not using the phone. He was checking something. Looking for something. The front desk clerk on duty that evening later described Blair as paranoid, and that word was chosen deliberately. Not confused, not distressed. Paranoid. It is a specific word that implies a specific kind of fear, the fear of something nearby, something that might already have arrived, something that could be confirmed if only you checked one more time. That is what his behaviour looked like to the person watching it from behind the desk. 5 times in 40 minutes, the camera caught him entering and leaving again. He found nothing. He went up to his room. No one knows exactly what happened there. The room showed signs consistent with a person who could not be still. Items moved from where the housekeeping staff had placed them, a general mild disorder that is different from the disorder of sleep, different from the disorder of a normal evening. It was the disorder of someone searching, checking, unable to settle. At some point after his last visit to the lobby, Blair Adams left his room. He crossed the parking lot. He made his way toward the 4 lanes of the interstate highway that ran along the edge of the property. Across those lanes, on the opposite side, was a construction site. The shell of a partially completed hotel building, dark, empty, occupied by no one. Something drew him in that direction. The construction site across the highway was not a remarkable place. It was a concrete frame and partially risen walls. The bones of a building that had not yet become one. After dark it was unlit, fenced and empty. There was nothing there that would logically draw a traveller in the middle of the night. No business. No residence. No purpose. And yet Blair crossed a busy highway to reach it. He walked across the highway in the dark toward a construction site no one should visit. What happened between Blair crossing that road and the moment his body was found has never been reconstructed. There are no witnesses. There is no surviving footage from the construction site itself. There are no physical traces that tell a coherent story of what occurred. No marks on the ground that establish a clear narrative of movement or struggle. The gap in the record is complete. The last hours of Blair Adams' life were contained entirely in the dark, and they gave nothing up. Dawn arrived early over Knoxville that July. The sky lightened before 6. Construction crews began arriving at the site by 7:30 in the morning. One of the workers found what was lying in the parking lot. Figure motionless on the asphalt. They called the police immediately. By the time the first officers arrived, Blair Adams had been dead for some time. The man lying in the parking lot was half undressed. His shirt had been opened. His trousers had been removed from his body and were lying nearby, along with his shoes and socks. The placement of the clothing was one of the first things investigators noted. It seemed arranged rather than scattered. Not the disorder of a struggle that ended mid-motion, but something more deliberate, something placed. The officers on the scene noted it immediately, and they could not explain it. Scattered across the ground around him was money. 3 currencies. Nearly $4,000. None of it had been taken. The inventory of what surrounded Blair Adams's body was extensive. Mixed banknotes in 3 currencies, Canadian, American and German, totaling close to $4,000. A black duffel bag containing maps and travel receipts documenting his route. A separate pouch holding 5 troy ounces of gold bars, gold and platinum coins, and an assortment of jewellery, a set of keys, a pair of sunglasses. Everything he had withdrawn from his bank account and his safety deposit box. It was all there, every item. This is the detail that breaks every conventional framework for understanding the crime. The man is found beaten to death. Around his body lie nearly $4,000 in cash and gold, and whoever was there when he died walked away from all of it. From the cash, from the gold bars, from the coins, from the jewellery. The medical examiner recorded the cause of death, deliberate blunt force to the abdomen, not random. The Knox County Sheriff's Department opened a homicide investigation. Detectives began retracing Blair's journey almost immediately. The bank records from Surrey, the ferry terminal logs, the border crossing records, the airline manifest, the car rental agreements, the hotel registration. Each step was documented. Each step, examined in isolation, made sense as a movement. But the whole picture, the sum of those steps, the direction they pointed, continued to resist explanation. Knoxville had no answer for why it had been chosen. Investigators spent months attempting to establish whether Blair had any prior connection to the city where he died. They conducted interviews. Hotel staff, construction workers, business owners, residents in the area around the site. They looked at every transaction he had made in the city, every location he had visited. Nobody had seen him before that evening. Nobody had spoken to him beyond the brief exchange at the front desk. He arrived in Knoxville as a complete stranger and died as one. Among all the strange details in this case, the German currency is the one that has found no comfortable resting place in any theory. Blair Adams had no documented connection to Germany. He had made no trips there in the years preceding his death. He had no known German contacts, no correspondence that pointed in that direction, no transactions at currency exchanges that investigators could trace. Near his body were keys that matched neither of his rental vehicles. What they opened is unknown. The unidentified keys have generated significant speculation among people who have studied this case. If Blair had arranged to meet someone in Knoxville, the keys could represent a handover. The second set given to him as part of whatever transaction brought him there. If he was followed, the keys may have been placed near his body. If he took them from somewhere, they point to a location no one has found. Each interpretation implies a different story, and none of them can be confirmed. The removal of his clothing, specifically his trousers and the careful placement of them alongside his shoes and socks, has been interpreted in 2 principal ways. Some investigators have described it as staging, a deliberate act with a message attached, a signature, a warning intended for someone other than Blair himself. Others have proposed that it resulted from the assault, a struggle that ended with his clothing stripped in the course of a violent confrontation. The case was eventually featured on a nationally broadcast true crime program with a long history of generating tips from wide audiences. The episode produced an unusually large volume of responses. Investigators followed every significant lead that came in during the weeks following the broadcast. People called with theories, with reported sightings, with connections they believed they could draw between Blair and other events. None of those leads produced a breakthrough. The case returned to quiet, as cold cases do. 3 theories have been proposed. None answers every question. None can be confirmed. None can be ruled out. The first theory is the most clinical. It holds that Blair Adams was experiencing a serious mental health episode, that the paranoia which drove him out of British Columbia was the product of a disordered internal state rather than any real external threat. Under this reading, his flight across the continent was a response to signals from inside his own mind, not to evidence of a genuine danger. The fear felt real to him. The difficulty with the mental health theory is that it does not account for the assault. A man in the grip of paranoid delusion does not necessarily find himself beaten to death in a parking lot 2,000 miles from home. The staging of the clothing, the unidentified keys, the German currency. These are not products of a troubled mind, they are facts about what was found at the scene. The second theory points to Blair's past. He had prior convictions involving drug offences. Some investigators had proposed that he became entangled again, or never fully disentangled, from a criminal network during the period before his death. Under this reading, the large amount of cash and gold he carried was not personal savings. It was currency of a different kind, funds being held or moved or recovered on behalf of someone whose patience had run out. Every theory breaks against the same fact. The money was not taken. Someone walked away from it. The third theory is the one that most people who follow this case find the hardest to set aside. It holds that someone tracked Blair Adams across the continent, that his fear was fully justified, that the threat was real and specific and mobile, and that it found him despite the 2,000 miles he had put between himself and British Columbia. Under this reading, the killing was deliberate and targeted. If the third theory is correct, then the motive is the central mystery. What did Blair Adams know, or have, or witness, or represent, that made his death necessary enough for someone to follow him across 2 countries and find him in a city he had driven to only hours before? And why, having found him, would that person leave nearly $4,000 in gold and cash on the ground and walk away without it? His mother gave interviews for years. She was patient with every retelling, precise and steady, because she believed that somewhere someone had information they had not yet shared. She said she had seen the fear in his face in those final weeks, had seen something in him that she had never seen before, something that was different in kind from the hard periods she had watched him move through in earlier years. This, she said, was not the same. It looked like knowledge. The file was never closed. The Knox County case remains officially open. No suspect has ever been publicly named. In the decades since 1996, Blair's case has found a persistent presence in the communities that form around unsolved crimes. People return to it with a frequency that reflects something beyond casual curiosity. A genuine collective unease with a story that will not resolve, will not offer a shape that the mind can settle into. They map his route. They revisit the crime scene photographs. They debate the German marks and the keys. The debates do not produce answers. Modern forensic methods, advanced DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, have produced breakthroughs in cold cases from the same era. Evidence preserved from the scene still exists. Without a suspect profile to compare it against, however, those methods have yet to produce a lead in this case. The technology is ready. What is missing is the one piece of information that would give the technology something to work with. That piece has not yet arrived. His car remained in the long-term lot at the Vancouver airport, where he left it when he made his third border crossing attempt. Investigators examined it carefully after his death. Inside, they found nothing that explained his plans or his state of mind. No letter, no recording, no destination written anywhere. He had left without instructions, without explanations. Whatever Blair intended, he carried it entirely inside himself, and it went with him when he died. There is a specific quality to cases like this one. Cases that sit at the border between the explicable and the genuinely impossible, that makes them resistant to being set aside. Each detail can be read in 2 or 3 ways. The German currency is a clue, or a coincidence, or something planted. The keys are evidence, or a mistake, or entirely irrelevant. Researchers have reconstructed his exact path using every available record. The bank timestamps, the border logs, the airline manifest, the car rental receipts, the hotel records. They have placed him at specific locations at specific times. The reconstruction is almost complete. And what it confirms is not clarity but strangeness. The path was directional. It had a logic. But the destination at the end of the logic, why Knoxville, why that specific site, why that specific night, remains entirely sealed. The evidence tells us exactly where he went and what was found around him. It says nothing about why. Construction workers arrived at the site at 7:30 on the morning of July 11th. None of them had seen or heard anything during the night. No vehicle had been observed entering or leaving after dark. No sound had been reported. The lot had simply, at some point between late evening and first light, acquired a body, surrounded by gold and cash that no one had thought to take. The image that stays with people who study this case is always the same one: the money on the ground. $4,000 in 3 currencies, spread across the asphalt around a man who had carried it from one country to another and who would not need it anymore. Whoever left Blair Adams in that parking lot could have taken it. They did not. That choice, or refusal or indifference, has never been explained. 30 years have passed since that morning in Knoxville. The questions have not changed. The file has not been closed. Investigators have made periodic public appeals for information since 1996. Anyone who knew Blair Adams during that final summer, anyone who saw him in Seattle or on the drive south through Virginia and into Tennessee or at any stop along the route, anyone who saw anything at the construction site during the night of July 10th or the early morning hours of July 11th. None of those appeals has produced a definitive lead. Whatever witnesses may exist have not yet come forward. What Blair's case leaves behind is not a story in the traditional sense. Stories have shape, a beginning and an arc, and a place where things resolve. This case has a beginning and a set of events, and then nothing where the resolution should be. It ends at the moment of discovery and extends no further. The question of who and why simply remains. Not fading over time, not growing less pressing, just hanging there in the record, unanswered. The thing that most people who follow this case return to eventually is the most basic fact about it. Blair was right. He told everyone something was going to happen to him. He spent the last week of his life trying to prevent it. He crossed a border 3 times. He flew across a continent. He drove 7 hours into an unfamiliar state and checked into a hotel under what he may have believed was a sufficient degree of distance. If you find yourself sitting with this story long after you've stopped listening, if the German currency or the unidentified keys or the money left untouched on the ground keeps coming back to you in the quiet, then you understand the pull that this case has on the people who find it. Some stories settle into you and refuse to leave. The question of who was in that parking lot on the night of July 10th, 1996 is one of those stories. The file remains open. Somewhere, someone knows what happened in that parking lot, and they have not spoken.